Possible new lead in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
Oh, hopefully this is going to find her. I don't know. Dan Bowens, what do you know? Could it help crack the case?
Well, we hope so, Rosanna and Jerry. There's been no shortage of tips, tens of thousands, in fact, but investigators say meaningful leads, yeah, they've been hard to come by, even after the family offered that $1 million reward earlier this week. Now, there is a new video that could provide a fresh clue. Let's take a look. The images here, obtained by Fox Digital. A Ring doorbell camera about 2 miles from Guthrie's Arizona home captured several cars that were passing through the area that same night. The same night that she disappeared. Investigators say at least 12 vehicles drove by between midnight and 6 a.m. on February 1st. With some seen around 2:30 a.m., right around the time the 84-year-old's pacemaker last synced with her phone. Now, the Pima County Sheriff's Department says it is aware of the video and is taking steps to review it. Unclear if they knew about it before or if it's something they're just now seeing. Maybe they can slow down those images, possibly to get any kind of details from those vehicles as they drive by. Will it lead to something? We'll find out. Well, with the lack of physical evidence, many experts believe investigators will also now be focusing on digital clues like cell phone.
Tomaso Chion has not spoken publicly since the night his mother-in-law vanished. Not one interview, not one statement, not one post, not one appearance. His wife Annie stood beside Savannah and Cameron on day 5 asking the kidnapper to bring Nancy home. She spoke. He did not. Savannah recorded video after video pleading for answers. She cried. She begged. She offered a reward that grew past $1 million.
Are you actively investigating the son-in-law in this case? I know there were reports earlier this week and you refuted that. You said you haven't eliminated everybody. Have you eliminated him or come close to it, or are you actively looking at him?
We're actively looking at everybody we come across in this case. Everybody. We would be irresponsible if we didn't talk to everybody. The Uber driver, the gardener, the pool person, whoever, everybody. It's so cliche, but everybody's still a suspect in our eyes. That's just how we look at things and think as cops. Does that mean we have a prime suspect? No, and the family's been very cooperative. They've done everything we've asked of them, and we want that relationship to continue. And sometimes people can be mean out there, and that can really harm us and harm our efforts.
Cameron traveled back immediately. Volunteers searched deserts and hillsides. Church members organized prayer circles. Thousands of strangers joined the search across Tucson. But the last person known to see Nancy Guthrie alive has remained completely silent.
Investigation. On day 3, my source said to me, high-level source, said to me that they have towed the sister and brother-in-law's car and that the Nest cameras were smashed, that the back door was left open, that there was blood in the house, forced entry, and that the brother-in-law may be the prime suspect now. That was on day 3. So why is it that that may have been the focus on day 3? You're going to hear some incredible analysis as to why these investigations ebb and flow, how that is 100% possible, and how it is entirely possible it can change as well. I think you'll remember I said that. A lot of times they can change their minds depending on where the investigation takes them, but some big key factors of what happened on day 1 and day 2 that may have led to something called confirmation bias. We're going to talk about that in a minute as well. And then the DNA. Everybody's waiting on the DNA from that glove from 2 miles away. The glove that looked like the glove on the ring cam. Does it match? Does it match the DNA inside the house? Is it going to take them anywhere? Is it just someone's glove? Going to talk about why it's taking longer than it should and if that's such a bad thing. It might be.
And a veteran journalist with decades inside major newsrooms went on the record and called him the prime suspect. The sheriff heard the accusation. The sheriff rejected it publicly. And days later, the sheriff cleared the family entirely. Yet the journalist refused to retract her reporting even after threats of a lawsuit. This is the part of the story few people are explaining. Who called him the prime suspect on February 4th, 2026, veteran journalist Ashleigh Banfield leaned into the microphone of her independent podcast and made a statement that immediately changed the direction of the entire conversation around the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. My law enforcement source tells me that Tomaso Chion is the prime suspect. Those words spread across social media within minutes. But Banfield was not an internet detective chasing clicks. For decades, she had reported from the center of some of the biggest stories in American news. She covered the aftermath of the September 11th attacks from Ground Zero while working for MSNBC. She later anchored programs on CNN and eventually hosted a nightly show on News Nation. When someone with that background makes a claim tied to a law enforcement source, people listen. According to Banfield, the information came from a source she described as deeply connected inside the investigation. Someone she said had strong credentials and direct knowledge of early developments in the case. She claimed investigators had already taken Annie Guthrie's vehicle into custody and placed it into evidence. She also suggested there was some connection between the car and Annie's husband, Tomaso Chion. At a T that moment, the name of the son-in-law entered the public conversation as a potential suspect. And once that kind of accusation is spoken aloud, it rarely disappears within hours. The Pima County Sheriff's Department responded publicly. Officials released a statement pushing back against the speculation. Investigators said they had not identified a suspect or person of interest in the case. They warned that spreading unverified accusations could harm the investigation. 2 days later, Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed reporters during a press conference. He repeated the same message clearly. There was no suspect. No one had been officially named as a person of interest. But then he added something important. Nobody is eliminated. That sentence left the door open to every possibility. It meant investigators were still considering every angle. Family members, neighbors, strangers, anyone. But 10 days later, the sheriff said something very different. On February 16th, Nanos announced that the Guthrie family, including spouses, had been cleared as possible suspects. He praised their cooperation and called them victims in the case. For many observers, that shift raised a new question. What happened during those 10 days? Because the public had not heard about any major breakthrough. There had been no arrest, no suspect, no explanation, and yet the family had suddenly been ruled out. Meanwhile, the forensic evidence was still being processed. Investigators had recovered a glove roughly 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. Inside it was DNA belonging to an unknown male, but that sample did not match anyone in the family. That fact eliminated the family from the glove. That it did not necessarily eliminate them from the crime itself. The DNA analysis was also being handled by a private forensic lab in Florida. According to the sheriff, there had been delays during the testing process, so the clearance of the family came before the final results were even complete. That timeline left many observers confused, because from the outside, it appeared investigators had moved from no one eliminated to family cleared, without publicly explaining what had changed, and that silence only fueled more speculation, especially online. While law enforcement attempted to quiet speculation, the media conversation was moving in the opposite direction. Banfield did not retract her statement. In fact, days later she appeared on the radio program hosted by legal analyst Dan Abrams. During that interview, she made it clear her source had not backed away from the information. According to Banfield, the source continued to stand by the claim that investigators initially viewed Tomaso Chion as the primary focus of suspicion in the earliest hours of the case. Her reporting also mentioned 2 details investigators had not yet publicly emphasized. First, that Annie Guthrie's vehicle had been taken into evidence. Second, that security cameras at Nancy's home had been smashed. Fragments of glass were reportedly found beneath the camera mounted near the entrance. If true, that suggested someone intentionally disabled surveillance before removing Nancy from the house. When the sheriff later announced the family had been cleared, Banfield responded with only a short comment. Nothing's changed. Behind the scenes, tensions were escalating. Sources close to the Guthrie family reportedly began exploring legal options. The accusation had placed enormous pressure on people already dealing with the disappearance of a loved one. Supporters argued that repeating the claim publicly could damage an innocent person's life. But Banfield maintained that her reporting was based on credible information. The controversy grew larger when other public figures began discussing the case. Journalist Megyn Kelly addressed the investigation during her radio show on SiriusXM. She suggested the repeated visits by investigators to Annie and Tomaso's home indicated authorities were still carefully reviewing the movements of the last people known to see Nancy alive. Kelly also pointed out that investigators often begin by examining individuals closest to the victim. That approach is standard in many criminal investigations. It does not automatically mean guilt, but it does mean investigators want to rule out every possibility. Former federal agent Jonathan Gilliam offered a similar observation during an appearance on television. He argued that clearing someone publicly can sometimes create complications if new evidence later appears. According to Gilliam, investigators normally prefer to avoid ruling people out completely unless they are certain. Together, these voices created a complicated public debate. On one side were law enforcement officials asking people to stop speculating. On the other were journalists and analysts questioning whether investigators had moved too quickly. And in the middle of that argument was one person who had said absolutely nothing: Tomaso Chion. Since the night Nancy disappeared, he had not given a public interview. He had not released a statement. He had not spoken on camera. Meanwhile, other members of the family had appeared repeatedly asking the public for help. Nancy's daughter, Savannah Guthrie, posted emotional messages asking anyone with information to come forward. The family even announced a reward that eventually exceeded $1 million. Still, Tomaso remained silent. For some observers, that silence raised suspicions. For others, it looked like something else entirely: the advice of a lawyer.
I'm going to say it is day 24 since our mom was taken in the dark of night from her bed. And every hour and minute and second and every long night has been agony since then, of worrying about her and fearing for her and aching for her, and most of all, just missing her. We know that millions of you have been praying. So many people have been praying, of every faith and no faith at all, praying for her return, and we feel those prayers. Please keep praying without ceasing. We still believe. We still believe in a miracle. We still believe that she can come home. Hope against hope. As my sister says, we are blowing on the embers of hope. We also know that she may be lost. She may already be gone. She may have already gone home to the Lord that she loves and is dancing in heaven with her mom and her dad and with her beloved brother Pierce and with our daddy. If this is what is to be, then we will accept it. But we need to know where she is. We need her to come home. For that reason, we are offering a family reward of up to $1 million for any information that leads us to her recovery. All of the information about this reward and the details is in the caption below. You can call the 1-800-TIP line. You can be anonymous if you want. Someone out there knows something that can bring her home. Somebody knows. And we are begging you to please come forward now. We also know that we are not alone in our loss. We know there are millions of families that have suffered with this kind of uncertainty. And for that reason today, we also are donating $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for their work in helping families who are coping with loss and actively looking for those who are lost.
In high-profile cases, silence can mean many things. Defense attorneys frequently advise their clients to avoid speaking publicly while an investigation is active. Even innocent statements can later be misinterpreted or taken out of context. There are many examples where interviews given early in an investigation later became evidence in court. So remaining quiet can sometimes be the safest legal strategy available. But silence can also create another problem. It leaves space for speculation. And in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, speculation quickly spread across the internet. Online forums began examining the timeline of the night she vanished. Nancy had returned home shortly before 10 p.m. Security cameras recorded activity inside the home several hours later. At some point after 1:40 in the morning, the footage stopped. Investigators later determined that the cameras had been damaged. According to law enforcement, the suspect spent more than 40 minutes inside the residence. That detail, suggested a level of familiarity with the environment. The intruder moved through the home without triggering obvious panic. He located Nancy, he disabled surveillance, and he left with her. Some analysts that behavior suggested someone who knew the layout of the house. Others believed it could simply indicate careful planning by an outsider. There was also evidence pointing away from the family entirely. Forensic teams recovered DNA belonging to 2 unidentified males. Neither profile matched anyone known to be connected to the Guthrie family. Investigators also described the suspect as a man roughly 5'9" or 5'10" in height. Some observers noted that this estimate did not appear to match Tomaso Chion's build. The suspect was also described wearing gloves, a ski mask, and carrying a backpack. Those details suggested someone attempting to avoid recognition. At the same time, investigators began exploring whether the house had been watched in advance. Reports indicated a suspicious visitor may have appeared at Nancy's door several weeks before the abduction. If that encounter involved the same person, it could mean the crime was planned well before the night it happened. While investigators tried to follow those leads, another unexpected consequence emerged. An innocent man found himself pulled into the center of online speculation. A Tucson teacher named Dominic Evans had once played in a band with Tomaso years earlier. Internet investigators discovered the connection and began comparing photographs of Evans to the masked figure seen in security footage. Crowds reportedly appeared outside his home. His family eventually hid inside their house to avoid the attention. Evans was questioned briefly by investigators and released. He had met Nancy Guthrie only once many years earlier, but in the world of online speculation, even the smallest connection can become a target. And as weeks passed, the investigation into Nancy's disappearance continued without a clear suspect. Thousands of tips had already been submitted. Search teams had covered miles of desert terrain. Yet the most important question remained unanswered. What really happened inside that house? Today is March 1st, 2026. More than 4 weeks have passed since Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home in Tucson. The search operation that once filled the neighborhood with patrol cars and volunteers has grown quieter. Federal agents have begun scaling down their visible presence. The command center that coordinated the early days of the investigation has shifted operations away from the neighborhood. Nancy's home is expected to be returned to the family. From this point forward, only the detectives directly assigned to the case will continue the daily work of tracking leads. The reward has now climbed above $1.3 million. Tips can still be submitted anonymously. The reward can still be paid in cash. Investigators say more than 23,000 tips have been received. Across all agencies involved in the case, the number of potential leads has reached tens of thousands. And yet there are still no suspects publicly identified. No arrests. No clear answers. The forensic evidence remains under analysis at a private laboratory in Florida. Officials have acknowledged delays in processing some of the DNA collected during the investigation. Meanwhile, questions about the timeline inside the house continue to circulate. A journalist publicly named Tomaso Chion as a prime suspect. The sheriff rejected that claim and cleared the family. Others argue that decision came too quickly. The debate continues. And through all of it, one fact has not changed. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She relies on daily medication and she has been missing for more than a month. If you have first-hand information about Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts, contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Tips can be anonymous. The reward can be paid in cash. The total reward now exceeds $1.3 million. The question remains unanswered. What really happened that night?